From exclusion to empowerment is not just a journey of personal success, it is a shift in the balance of power, a transformation that begins with an act of dismissal and ends with the rewriting of the rules. It starts in a quiet, sometimes humiliating moment when someone is told they do not belong in a room, when their presence is dismissed as unnecessary or their voice regarded as unworthy of the conversation. For a Black woman, this moment carries centuries of weight, as history has too often positioned her on the margins, asking her to contribute without recognition, to build without ownership, to fight without being invited to the victory table. The exclusion is never just about one meeting, one position, or one board seat. It is a symptom of a deeper system that decides who holds power and who is kept outside the doors of decision-making. The sting of exclusion is both personal and political. It is personal because it calls into question your own worth, your place in the hierarchy, and the value others assign to your work. It is political because every act of exclusion reinforces a pattern, the same faces in leadership, the same perspectives shaping policy, and the same decisions made without the people they most affect. To be told, directly or indirectly, that you cannot be part of the conversation is to be reminded that someone else has the authority to decide your access. In the case of the Black woman, that authority has often been exercised through stereotypes, biases, and invisible but very real barriers that keep her on the periphery. But from this place of exclusion, a spark can ignite. The transition to empowerment does not always happen immediately. It often begins quietly, with a gathering of evidence, a sharpening of skills, and a steady, deliberate refusal to accept the limitations imposed by others. Empowerment grows in the spaces between rejection and persistence. It feeds on the determination to prove wrong every assumption that said you could not lead. It is fueled by the moments where you watch decisions being made poorly without your input and realize that the only solution is to ensure you are at that table, not as a token participant but as someone steering the conversation. Empowerment, in this context, is not granted, it is claimed. There is a critical distinction here. Many expect that those who have been excluded should wait for permission, for a gracious invitation to return. But empowerment comes when you stop waiting for the invitation and instead prepare yourself to take the seat on your own terms. This preparation is not just about credentials or qualifications. It is about building the confidence to walk into spaces that were designed without you in mind and operate as though they were made for you all along. It is about carrying yourself with the authority of someone who knows her value and refuses to let that value be diminished. For a Black woman returning to the room that once denied her entry, empowerment also comes from the understanding that her presence changes the room itself. It shifts the conversation, it brings perspectives that were absent, and it disrupts the comfort of homogeneity that has allowed exclusion to persist. This empowerment is not about assimilation into the existing culture of the boardroom. It is about transforming that culture so that the same tactics used to exclude her cannot be used on the next person. It is a statement of continuity. She does not just enter the room, she leaves the door open for others to follow. From exclusion to empowerment is also a story of resilience under pressure. The resilience to keep showing up in spaces where you were once unwelcome, to speak in rooms that once silenced you, and to hold your ground when your authority is questioned simply because it is unfamiliar to those in power. It is resilience built over years of navigating double standards, of having to be twice as prepared and twice as competent to be seen as equal. This resilience is not born from choice but from necessity, and it becomes the foundation upon which empowerment stands. The process of moving from exclusion to empowerment reshapes the individual just as much as it reshapes the system. It requires clarity of purpose, because without purpose, the fight to be included can become exhausting and hollow. Purpose turns that fight into something more, a mission not just to take a seat at the table but to redefine what that table represents. It pushes the empowered leader to ask who else is missing from this space, whose voices are still unheard, and how power can be redistributed rather than simply concentrated in new hands. The moment of empowerment is not just a personal victory. It is a visible challenge to the structures that once maintained control by keeping certain people out. It is a demonstration that exclusion is not permanent, that those who are pushed aside can return not just as participants but as leaders. And it reminds those in power that every act of exclusion plants the seeds for its own undoing, because those excluded learn, adapt, and eventually come back stronger than before. Breaking barriers in leadership is not a single act but a continuous, often exhausting process of confronting and dismantling systems that were never built to accommodate certain people in positions of authority. It is about more than getting a title or an office. It is about challenging the unspoken rules, the entrenched biases, and the invisible boundaries that dictate who is allowed to lead and how they are expected to do so. For a Black woman stepping into leadership, the barriers are layered, not only the glass ceilings that limit advancement but also the glass walls that confine her to certain roles, the floors that shift beneath her when she dares to step outside expectations, and the constant scrutiny of her every move. These barriers are maintained through tradition, reinforced by culture, and perpetuated by individuals who may not even recognize the part they play in sustaining them. The act of breaking barriers begins with recognizing that the barriers exist. They are not always obvious. Some are built into the policies and structures of organizations, while others are maintained through social dynamics and unspoken norms. There are the overt obstacles, such as being overlooked for promotions or excluded from critical conversations, and the subtle ones, such as the coded language used to undermine credibility, terms like too aggressive, not a good fit, or lacking leadership presence that disguise bias as professional judgment. Leadership in such an environment means not only excelling in your role but also navigating the politics of perception, constantly negotiating the balance between authenticity and acceptability in order to move forward without being pushed out. Breaking barriers also means rejecting the limited roles that have historically been assigned. For generations, Black women have been expected to support leadership rather than embody it, to work behind the scenes rather than in the spotlight. Stepping into leadership challenges that expectation directly, but it also comes with the burden of representation. Every action and decision carries the weight of being seen as a reflection of all those who share your identity. This pressure can be isolating, yet it can also be motivating. It creates a determination not only to succeed but to succeed in a way that makes space for others to follow, to widen the path rather than pulling the ladder up behind. The process is rarely straightforward. Breaking barriers often requires taking risks that others in more privileged positions may never have to consider. It may mean speaking up in rooms where your perspective is unwelcome, confronting discriminatory practices head-on, or making decisions that disrupt the status quo and attract resistance. It demands resilience in the face of criticism that is not always about your ideas but about your presence in a space that some believe should remain closed to you. It involves learning when to push directly against a barrier and when to work around it strategically, using influence and alliances to create change from within. Leadership in this context is an act of defiance, but it is also an act of vision. Breaking barriers is not just about removing obstacles for yourself, it is about imagining a different reality for those who will come after you. It requires looking beyond your own position and asking what systems need to be changed so that leadership is no longer defined by exclusion. This vision is often met with resistance, not because it lacks merit but because it disrupts comfort and challenges long-standing power structures. Yet, without this forward-looking approach, leadership becomes assimilation rather than transformation, and the barriers remain intact for others. There is also an emotional cost to breaking barriers. It means carrying the awareness that you may be the first, or one of the few, in a particular position. It means being prepared for the loneliness of having no peers who share your experiences, for the constant calculation of how much of yourself you can reveal without it being used against you, for the reality that some will attribute your success to luck or tokenism rather than skill and merit. It means persevering even when recognition is withheld and victories are minimized. Yet, in enduring these challenges, the act of breaking barriers becomes even more powerful because it demonstrates that leadership can thrive outside the narrow molds that have been imposed for so long. Breaking barriers in leadership transforms not only the individual but the entire landscape in which they operate. When one person crosses into spaces that were previously closed, it forces those spaces to adapt. It brings new perspectives into the decision-making process, perspectives that challenge assumptions and reveal blind spots. It shifts what is considered normal, proving that leadership is not the exclusive domain of any single race, gender, or background. This shift may happen slowly, met with skepticism or even hostility, but once it begins, it is difficult to reverse because it expands the collective understanding of who can lead and how leadership can look. The courage to break barriers is not simply about personal ambition, it is about creating a new standard. It is about refusing to accept that the way things have always been is the way they must continue to be. It is about proving that leadership is enriched by diversity, strengthened by inclusion, and redefined when those who were once excluded take their rightful place at the table. The power of resilience is forged in the moments when giving up seems easier than continuing, when the weight of setbacks threatens to bury ambition, and when the voices of doubt, both internal and external, grow loud enough to make you question your path. Resilience is not a trait people are simply born with, it is built through repeated trials, sharpened by challenges, and tested in situations where success feels out of reach. For a Black woman navigating spaces that were never designed for her success, resilience becomes not just a useful quality but a survival skill. It is the ability to keep moving forward even when doors close, to adapt when circumstances change, and to find strength when the environment offers little support. Resilience begins in small acts. It might look like showing up to the meeting where you know your ideas will be challenged more than others, or applying for a position despite knowing the odds are stacked against you. These are not grand, cinematic moments but quiet choices made again and again, each one a refusal to let setbacks define the outcome. Over time, these choices build a foundation of self-trust, the knowledge that no matter the obstacle, you have faced difficulty before and emerged stronger. This self-trust becomes a source of stability when the world around you is unpredictable or hostile. The power of resilience is magnified by perspective. Resilient leaders understand that challenges are not just interruptions to progress, they are opportunities to learn, adapt, and refine strategies. Failure does not erase capability, it refines it. For someone breaking through systemic barriers, resilience reframes rejection as redirection. Instead of interpreting no as the end, it becomes a signal to find another way in, to adjust the approach without abandoning the mission. This mindset allows a leader to operate with flexibility, able to pivot without losing sight of the larger goal. Resilience also draws strength from identity. For many, being a Black woman in leadership means carrying a dual awareness, the pride of representing something larger than yourself and the pressure of being scrutinized through the lens of bias. This duality can be draining, but it can also become a wellspring of determination. Every obstacle overcome is not just a personal victory but a symbolic one, a reminder to others that persistence is possible. This awareness fuels the commitment to keep pushing, even when the journey feels solitary. Part of the power of resilience lies in its ability to transform adversity into credibility. People respect leaders who have endured hardship and kept going. Their authority does not come from titles alone but from the lived experience of navigating obstacles and emerging with lessons that others can follow. For a Black woman who has faced exclusion, dismissal, or doubt, resilience builds a leadership presence that cannot be easily undermined because it is rooted in reality, not theory. It communicates to peers, subordinates, and even detractors that persistence is more than an abstract value, it is an active, daily choice. Resilience also operates as a quiet form of resistance. In spaces where the hope may be that you will tire, falter, or simply leave, continuing to show up becomes an act of defiance. It is a statement that you will not be erased, that your voice will not be silenced by the discomfort of others, and that your contributions will be felt regardless of how welcome you are made to feel. This kind of resilience does not shout, it endures. It shifts the balance of power simply by refusing to retreat. Another aspect of resilience is its ability to inspire. When people witness someone facing repeated challenges without surrendering, it challenges their own perceptions of what is possible. For those who share similar struggles, it serves as proof that obstacles can be overcome. For those unfamiliar with such challenges, it opens their eyes to the strength required to succeed in the face of adversity. The power of resilience, therefore, is not just personal, it ripples outward, influencing how others see themselves and the systems around them. The development of resilience is not without cost. It demands emotional labor, the willingness to confront fear, and the stamina to keep working when progress feels slow or invisible. It requires moments of vulnerability alongside strength, the ability to acknowledge difficulty without letting it dictate the outcome. Over time, however, these costs are balanced by the empowerment that comes from knowing you can survive, adapt, and thrive regardless of circumstance. Resilience also reshapes ambition. When you know you can recover from setbacks, you begin to take bolder risks. You are less afraid of failure because you have already experienced it and learned that it does not define you. This fearlessness becomes a strategic advantage in leadership, allowing you to make decisions with clarity rather than hesitation, to pursue opportunities that others may avoid because of uncertainty. Each challenge faced becomes another building block in a structure that cannot be easily dismantled. Representation changes decisions because the perspectives present in a room directly influence the outcomes that emerge from it. Decisions are never made in a vacuum. They are shaped by the lived experiences, values, and assumptions of the people making them. When the decision-makers all share similar backgrounds, their understanding of problems and solutions is inevitably limited, even if they believe they are being objective. Introducing representation, particularly from those who have historically been excluded, reshapes not only the conversation but the priorities that guide it. For a Black woman stepping into a leadership role, her presence is not symbolic, it carries with it insights and realities that others in the room may never have considered. Representation challenges the blind spots that form when everyone at the table has walked a similar path. These blind spots can lead to decisions that unintentionally ignore or harm entire communities simply because no one in the room has first-hand experience with their challenges. A leader who brings a different perspective disrupts that pattern, asking questions that others may not think to ask, pointing out impacts that would otherwise go unnoticed, and pushing for solutions that are inclusive rather than convenient. This disruption is not about creating division, it is about expanding the scope of understanding so that the decisions made are both fairer and more effective. The presence of diverse representation also changes the dynamics of power. In many organizations, leadership has historically been concentrated among a narrow group, which reinforces the idea, whether openly stated or silently implied, that power belongs to certain people and not others. When a Black woman takes a seat at the decision-making table, it sends a visible message that leadership is not confined to one race, gender, or background. This visibility matters not just to the people in the room but to those watching from outside, who see in her example a possibility for themselves. Representation becomes a signal that the path to leadership is open to more than just the few who have traditionally occupied it. Representation also influences priorities. The lived experiences of leaders shape what they see as urgent, what they see as negotiable, and what they see as unacceptable. For example, someone who has faced systemic bias may be more attuned to how certain policies could unintentionally reinforce inequality. They may push for outreach to communities that have been overlooked or question hiring practices that perpetuate homogeneity. These shifts in priority can lead to decisions that are more equitable and better aligned with the organization's stated values, but such shifts are unlikely to occur without voices in the room who have experienced those inequities firsthand. The impact of representation is also felt in how problems are defined. If leadership views an issue solely through the lens of efficiency or profitability, they may miss the human cost of their decisions. A leader from a marginalized background can reframe the conversation to include those human factors, highlighting long-term benefits that might be ignored in favor of short-term gains. This reframing does not dilute the importance of measurable outcomes, rather, it strengthens them by ensuring that they account for the full reality of the situation. Decisions grounded in a wider range of perspectives are more sustainable because they anticipate a broader range of consequences. Representation changes not only what decisions are made but how they are made. The process itself shifts when diverse voices are involved. Conversations become more layered, debates more nuanced, and solutions more creative. When everyone in the room thinks alike, consensus can be reached quickly but at the cost of overlooking better options. When representation is present, the decision-making process may take longer, but the results are often stronger because they have been tested against multiple viewpoints. This kind of decision-making builds resilience into the organization, making it better prepared to navigate complexity. There is also a symbolic weight to representation that cannot be ignored. For those who have long been excluded from leadership, seeing someone who shares their background in a position of power can be transformative. It affirms that their voices, too, could matter in shaping the future. This sense of connection fosters trust between leadership and the wider community, making it more likely that decisions will be accepted and supported. Trust is an intangible asset, but it is critical to the successful implementation of any policy or initiative. Representation helps build that trust by showing that leadership is not making decisions in isolation from the people those decisions affect. In environments where representation has been historically absent, its introduction can be met with resistance. Some may question whether the person in the role is truly qualified, framing their skepticism as concern for merit rather than acknowledging their own discomfort with change. Overcoming this resistance requires both skill and patience, but the very act of maintaining a seat at the table begins to shift perceptions. Over time, the presence that was once questioned becomes normalized, and the contributions of that leader speak for themselves, influencing not just individual decisions but the culture of decision-making itself. Turning setbacks into strategy begins with a refusal to let obstacles remain as they are. It is the ability to take a moment of loss, rejection, or failure and examine it not only for what went wrong but for what can be learned, repurposed, and transformed into forward movement. Setbacks are inevitable in any pursuit, but for a Black woman navigating leadership spaces where biases and barriers are common, they can occur more frequently and with greater personal cost. The difference between being derailed by them and growing stronger through them lies in how they are approached. When each setback is treated as information rather than a verdict, it becomes a tool for building the next step in the journey. The first step in this transformation is perspective. In the moment, a setback can feel like a definitive stop, the closing of a door that cannot be reopened. But strategy requires stepping back and seeing the broader context. Was the rejection a sign that the timing was wrong, that the approach was incomplete, or that the environment was not yet ready for the change being proposed? Each of these possibilities leads to a different next move, and identifying which applies is essential to moving forward effectively. This analytical approach prevents setbacks from becoming personal wounds that fester and instead reframes them as puzzles to solve. Turning a setback into strategy also involves gathering insight from the experience. This means not only looking inward but also seeking external feedback, even when it is uncomfortable to hear. For leaders, this might involve asking direct questions after a failed proposal or project. What were the weaknesses in the plan? Which factors were beyond my control? Which ones were within my influence but overlooked? By taking this information seriously, a setback becomes a roadmap for improvement. This kind of learning builds adaptability, ensuring that future attempts are informed by past challenges rather than repeating the same patterns. For a Black woman in leadership, setbacks often come intertwined with bias, and part of the strategy is learning to separate the noise of prejudice from legitimate critique. This separation is critical because internalizing bias as truth can erode confidence, while ignoring constructive feedback can limit growth. The skill lies in filtering the feedback to extract what is useful while discarding what is rooted in unfair judgment. This selective absorption turns even biased situations into opportunities for advancement, ensuring that energy is not wasted on unproductive battles while still leveraging whatever insight the situation provides. Another element of turning setbacks into strategy is innovation. Sometimes, a closed door forces exploration of paths that would otherwise remain unseen. A denied promotion might spark the decision to develop a new skill, start a new initiative, or pursue leadership in a different arena altogether. In this way, the setback becomes a catalyst for creative problem-solving, leading to outcomes that may ultimately surpass the original goal. This willingness to pivot, to see beyond the immediate disappointment, is a hallmark of strategic resilience. The process also requires emotional regulation. Setbacks naturally bring frustration, disappointment, and even anger. While these emotions are valid, strategy demands that they be channeled into action rather than reaction. This might mean taking time to process before responding, ensuring that decisions made in the wake of a setback are deliberate rather than impulsive. Maintaining composure in these moments not only preserves credibility but also allows for clearer thinking, which is essential when planning the next steps. Turning setbacks into strategy is not done in isolation. It often involves leveraging networks, allies, and mentors who can offer guidance, share their own experiences, and provide alternative perspectives. These connections can reveal options that might not be visible from within the immediate struggle. They can also serve as sounding boards for new ideas, helping refine them before they are put into action. Strategic use of relationships ensures that each setback expands the pool of resources available for the next move. Over time, this practice builds a leader's reputation for problem-solving and persistence. When others see that setbacks do not stop progress but instead lead to new and often better solutions, it changes how they perceive that leader's capability. It communicates a depth of competence that goes beyond technical skill. It shows the capacity to navigate uncertainty and emerge stronger. In environments where leadership is tested not only by success but by the ability to recover from failure, this quality is invaluable. In this way, setbacks cease to be purely negative events. They become integral parts of the leadership journey, shaping decision-making processes and strengthening resolve. The very moments that could have ended momentum become the fuel for the next stage of growth, and each challenge faced becomes part of a larger strategy that pushes beyond the limits imposed by circumstance or expectation. Leading with purpose, not permission, begins with the understanding that true leadership is not dependent on being granted authority by others but on embracing the responsibility to act in alignment with one's values and vision. It is the mindset that leadership is not a title to be conferred but a role to be lived, and that waiting for approval to lead often means waiting indefinitely. For a Black woman in spaces where leadership opportunities have historically been withheld, this principle takes on deeper significance. It is a declaration that she will not wait for the comfort or validation of those who have traditionally controlled access to decision-making. Instead, she steps into leadership because the work demands it, because the cause matters, and because her voice has value whether or not it is invited. Leading with purpose means beginning every action with clarity of intention. Purpose acts as the compass, directing decisions and sustaining momentum when challenges arise. Without purpose, leadership can become reactive, swayed by trends, external pressures, or the need to please others. With purpose, however, every choice is measured against a clear vision of what should be achieved and why it matters. For someone whose leadership presence disrupts long-standing norms, this clarity provides both direction and stability, anchoring actions even when faced with resistance or doubt from others. This approach rejects the idea that permission is a prerequisite for leadership. In many environments, especially those with entrenched hierarchies or cultural biases, waiting for permission can become a subtle way of keeping people from leading at all. Approval may never come, or it may be conditional on compromising the very values that make the leadership necessary. By acting without waiting for this approval, a leader signals that authority is not something to be granted from above but something that can be claimed through initiative, competence, and results. This does not mean disregarding collaboration or respect. It means refusing to let others' discomfort determine whether progress is made. Leading with purpose also shifts the focus from personal advancement to collective benefit. When decisions are guided by a commitment to a cause rather than the desire for status, the impact resonates more deeply and gains wider support. This is especially important for a leader representing communities that have often been excluded from power. The authenticity of acting from purpose builds trust, showing others that leadership is being exercised not for personal gain but for the advancement of shared goals. This trust becomes a source of influence that no title alone can create. Acting without permission often requires courage, because it can mean stepping into spaces where your presence is questioned or resisted. It may involve making decisions that are unpopular in the short term but necessary for long-term change. Courage in this context is not the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it, driven by the conviction that the work matters more than the approval of those who may prefer the status quo. This courage is sustained by purpose, which provides the why behind each step and helps withstand the criticism or doubt that inevitably arises. Another dimension of leading with purpose is accountability. Without permission as a framework, a leader must be self-directed in holding themselves to high standards. This means being transparent in decision-making, willing to explain choices, and open to feedback, even from those who may disagree. Accountability reinforces credibility, showing that leadership without permission is not an excuse for recklessness but a disciplined commitment to doing what is right. It ensures that purpose is not just a slogan but a measurable force guiding real outcomes. In practice, leading with purpose can take many forms. It might mean initiating a project that addresses a gap no one else is willing to tackle, advocating for policy changes that others avoid for fear of controversy, or mentoring people who are overlooked because they do not fit the conventional profile of future leaders. Each of these actions bypasses the need for formal approval and instead focuses on meeting real needs and creating tangible impact. Over time, this kind of leadership shifts perceptions, proving that authority is as much about action as it is about position. Leading with purpose, not permission, also models a powerful example for others. It demonstrates that leadership is accessible to anyone willing to align action with conviction, and it encourages others to take initiative rather than waiting for someone else to act. In environments where hesitation is reinforced by fear of rejection or failure, this example can be transformative, inspiring a culture where leadership is distributed rather than hoarded, and where more voices are empowered to contribute to progress. When leadership is driven by purpose rather than the granting of permission, it naturally disrupts systems that thrive on exclusion. It challenges the idea that influence must be bestowed by gatekeepers and replaces it with the understanding that it can be earned through commitment, competence, and vision. This redefinition of leadership not only benefits the individual who steps forward but changes the expectations for what leadership can and should look like in the spaces they inhabit.